Hello, it's Charles Scoville, your Golden Harvest agronomist, with your Agronomy in Action Focus Friday podcast here on October the 3rd. Let's get a heat unit accumulation update, talk about what I'm seeing in my travels across the area, learn how to do a proper corn push test, and dig into the concept of phantom yield loss and how that might be costing you profits at the end of the day. So, as far as our current heat unit accumulation, basing that on a planting date of May the 1st, in the East Lansing area, we've now accumulated 2,585 heat units. In comparison, we are behind by about 70 heat units from last year, but ahead 23 heat units versus the 5-year average. Now, going south, the cold water, which is reflective of my northern Indiana, northern Ohio areas, we're now 79 heat units behind last year, but just 12 heat units behind the 5-year average. Finally, going north to the Mount Pleasant area, we're 93 heat units behind last year, but 47 ahead of the 5-year average. So this weekend, again, looks to be a warm one, but as we get into mid next week and we're finally going to start to feel a little bit more like fall out there with a little bit cooler and wetter weather pattern on its way. Now, as far as my travels this past week, it was a good week to walk some of our test plots and evaluate both the current and the newly advanced corn and soybean products across our area. As promised, it was pretty easy to find corn that had hit black layer, and boy, now we just need to decide what moisture we want to harvest this corn crop at. Now, as far as soybeans, we've started to take off some plots and yields are coming in better than expected. My worry about seeing so many 2 and 3 bean pods and our concerns about the small seed size, that's real. But as for the early harvested beans, yields are holding their own so far. I think the saving grace has been that the high number of pods within each ring of pods at each of the node, they seem to have been greater than normal this year. That's possibly making up for the lower number of beans per pod. Either way, let's do what we can to not harvest beans at moistures below 10% and then just give away that yield to the market. Now, as we're seeing the corn maturity just fly past that black layer or 32% moisture and while getting quickly into the mid 20s for moisture, this is probably a great time to discuss the concept of phantom yield loss. So this begs the question, what really is phantom yield loss? So according to Jason Webster of Precision Planting's PTI Research Farm, quote, "It's when some of your corn's weight vanishes as it dries in the field." Now, this weight loss is invisible, hence the name. Now, he further states that phantom yield loss might occur due to things like, wind damage or stalk lodging, dry matter loss from respiration, ear rots, leading to kernel damage, and insect damage, leading to kernel damage, and increased butt shelling at the corn head, and finally increased fines or cracked dry kernels. Now, in our area, I would also add to that list damage due to wildlife, especially deer, as they not only feed on our corn crop, but they also walk through the corn crop, oftentimes knocking over already fragile stalks and then, of course, making harvest more difficult. Now, when Jason has run the numbers over the past 2 years where he's at in that central Illinois area, he's found that if you're running all your corn through a commercial dryer at the local elevator and paying top dollar for that service, then even though he has found the greatest yield has come from harvesting your corn at around 27% moisture, the greatest return on investment these past 2 years was to let your corn get down to that 16% moisture. But if you were doing your own on-farm drying, then the greatest return on investment was to harvest your corn at 26% moisture. So, what this really means is that, yeah, phantom loss is real, and we do lose yield in our corn crop the longer we leave it in the field to dry naturally. The question you need to answer for your own farm, though, is the economics of this decision. Now, knowing what your cost is for drying is one of those questions. Combining this with your kind of stomach for accepting the risk of corn going down and what that might mean for your operation, not only in the loss of harvestable corn, but also in the cost of time and frustration to try to get that crop off the ground and into the combine. Now, this is why it's just so important for you to be taking the time right now to walk your cornfields and do a simple push test to determine how solid or fragile those corn stalks are currently. Then, as you continue to do this weekly and start to identify fields that are losing their stalk integrity, you can schedule those fields for harvest at a higher moisture level and avoid even higher phantom yield losses. Now, for performing a push test on your corn, there's multiple ways of checking that integrity of your corn crop. Some folks, they'll bend over and pinch the stalks at different points up and down the corn plant, looking for stalks that easily collapse between their fingers. Now, others choose not to bend over and instead stay standing and just push the stalks to the side, kind of at that ear height. Now, you'll push those stalks over to about a 45-degree angle and then just count the number of stalks that break or don't return to that upright position. Now, see, as I get older, I find this is my preferred method of testing stalks for late season intactness. When I start counting greater than 5 or 6 stalks out of 10 not returning to that upright position, this is when I start to get worried about my stalks withstanding that next big wind and or rain event. In fact, when I was walking one of our plots in northern Indiana this past week, I had hybrids ranging from 0 stalks showing issues all the way up to one hybrid showing 6 out of 10 stalks starting to break apart from the push test. Now, when I check multiple areas within each field and I start to see a consistent issue with a particular field, then scheduling harvest sooner rather than later really needs to become a priority before that phantom yield loss becomes substantial yield loss. So, folks, as we wrap up this week's Agronomy in Action Focus Friday podcast, let's continue to get out there and walk our fields. Now, whether it's you or the hired hand, make sure they're out there pushing on stalks and checking for standability weekly. You know the fields and the parts of fields that are usually at the greatest risk of standability issues, so let's check those first. Drought has done a number on many parts of our area this year, and why the cannibalization of stalks that goes hand in hand with drought stress is real. Let's not let things get ahead of us this year and then just wish we had started harvest earlier when we could have taken full advantage of this recent nice harvest window. This is Charles Scoble, your Golden Harvest agronomist, with your Agronomy in Action Focus Friday. Let's be safe out there.